History. So, right. I'm survivor. Why don't you what did I manage? She's so protected that that's kind of, you know, right here. No. Show up. You think she does. So sweet. Kind of. Yeah, you know. Question. I don't. I understand. Mm-hmm. Hello, Jan. Can you hear me? You just throw something in the chat. I didn't do a sound test yet. No, maybe you can't hear me. Maybe I have to do that sound test. Let's do the sound test. Test. I can definitely hear that. Testing, testing. Hello, and welcome back to the Psychology of Organizational Development. This class, we will be wrapping up the last 2 chapters of the textbook, talking about challenges and the future for organizations, at least as it was seen in 2008. A company can become successful and be very successful, and that's good while they remain adapted to their environment. But the environment we're in is dynamic and it changes in ways that we don't foresee. Like we didn't foresee COVID happening, did we? And then organizations suddenly had to rush to accommodate to that. And maybe organizations didn't really like the idea of remote work. And actually there was folks with disabilities who wanted remote working arrangements, flexible work accommodations for a long time and tried to fight for them. And they had a hard time getting that. And then all of a sudden, right, we were all having Zoom meetings and it's seen as okay and appropriate. That kind of radical change is something that happens when its management realizes that things are going to crash and burn, right? The organization may have been successful in the past, but things started to change and maybe they weren't paying attention to the external environment. Maybe they were rationalizing things, looking the other way. Maybe they're super committed to what they're doing. And then when they realized, it was too late or almost too late. So success can work against an organization when it really leads to pride. Okay? You think, oh, we're the best at this and we're the top of the top 10 and we have all this credibility. And so you get prideful and you think you know best and really you don't. When I've seen dysfunctional organizations, when I've been in the position of an observer, looking at the decision of a manager and thinking, what are they doing? Can't they see? If you've been in that position. What I did notice is that they were following culture. Like they were acting almost reflexively the way they were trained to, the way that they were taught to and socialized to with norms and values. And maybe there's 20 years of rewards and punishments behind them that has really taught them to act this way. And when you're in it, and you can't see the forest for the trees, and maybe that external observer that goes, oh, no. Okay, and when you're the external practitioner, it might feel like that. Now, OD is a warm and fuzzy intervention strategy that's all about caring and sharing and being the best we can be, acting adaptively and not having any dysfunctional conflicts. But when an organization is on its way off the cliff, how much luck are you going to have? Do you think they're really going to be ready to hear you? Are they really going to be ready to start working together, or are they too stuck in their turf wars? And when people have been having political turf wars for 10, 20 years, they get really stuck in that world and they can't step back and say, wow, this is going to destroy us all. No, they keep going, right? Leads to a fall. So never get complacent. So when we realize, oh no, the fall is coming, and we scramble, and we see efforts at organizational transformation, drastic changes in organizational functions, change the president, replace the board of governors, close these plants, lay off all these people. They're drastic and they're abrupt, and sometimes they work and sometimes it's too late. OD is supposed to be gradual and strategic, and so you can't start OD that far into a problem, right? You want to, OD teaches us to build renewal processes into an organization from the start, so that you have a department whose job is to always look around, right? And always wonder, what's going on out there, and is there something we should be doing differently, and having those conversations and questioning, what are our norms, what are our values, and are these really working? Doing consultations, taking the temperature in the organization, okay? Keeping us humble. OT is, so OD, which is supposed to be gradual, strategic, and all collaborative and respectful and lovey-dovey, assumes these equal power relationships and frowns on power differences. But when management is trying to save an organization that's about to crash and burn, and maybe it's a new leader that just came in to do it, they're gonna use top-down methods that are power-driven and coercive. That's not in line with OD. OT, organizational transformation, can work, right? There are companies that have been turned back from the brink, and doing that well requires not any vision, but a good vision, right? The new leader has to be taking us somewhere that can actually work. And, managers can be out of touch with reality. That's why we talk about managers' ability to test reality, because they can be so up and above it all, and they can be arrogant, they can be narcissistic and think they know everything when they know nothing. But let's assume that there's someone who does kind of figure out, we need to go that way, we go that way quickly. They need to be able to communicate that vision. Okay? They need to be willing to clean house. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, in a dysfunctional organization, you're going to have a lot of politics and a lot of nasty, stupid, vicious infighting. And it's not going to be one person that's the problem, and you kind of lay off that one person. People, especially as they stay in organizations, develop these cliques, right? And the cliques can span managerial networks. And so it's not, so you have one group that might be a big issue, right? And what I've seen happen is that a new manager will, they have their vision, and then they might find out that some subordinate manager, let's say they're the vice president, it's a director under them, doesn't share their vision, wants to keep doing things the way they're doing things. Then you can see then I've seen a process, it can be a process that takes like months, a year of dismantling that power base. So maybe you find some way to let go of the director, and now there was the person that worked under the director, and the directors go to ally in the other department. And so there might be, say, 5 folks. And then then you'll see this restructuring. And sometimes they'll say, it's about the positions, not the people. But positions and people, there's always a person in the position. And then they can kind of clean sweep the positions with a restructuring. And then that allows the manager to hire people who are in line with the vision. Okay? That's your restructuring. And it happens. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it's too late. So OD is incremental. It avoids these large shocks and these large layoffs, but it's continuous and it's ongoing. So when you see an organization that is very change resistant, right, that doesn't have renewal processes built into it, it might feel like a very stable place. It might look very stable, but what they're doing is possibly heading towards this cliff, which they will then drop off precipitously. It's too late. What we want is incremental change that's collaborative and that doesn't involve these big shocks and upsets, which are, very hard on people. If you've ever been laid off, you know that. If you've been a layoff survivor, you're seeing your colleagues be laid off, you know how difficult that can be. So you want to avoid that. Build renewal into your organization, because really, how many companies, how many organizations actually are in a totally stable environment? That isn't going to change. Maybe a long time ago, maybe back in 1900s, things were pretty stable. Maybe 1900, it wasn't that different from 1910, but think about how different 2020 was from 2010. And I see you undergraduate students with these phones, and you know what? When I was in first year, we didn't have these. There was no Snapchat. You couldn't just Google anything in a second, and it's it's so normal, and yet it's a little strange. When I was an undergraduate, I did have a cell phone, but it's like a small brick, and it looked like a walkie-talkie, and you couldn't search the internet on it. So my point is that things are changing, and they always have been changing. 1900 was different from 1800, but they're changing faster and faster and faster and faster. So you really can't afford to be prideful and complacent. And here's an issue with management. We've learned in our previous units, remember, power and evil in organizations. When you have a hierarchy and folks on the top have more power, having more power leads to psychological distance, being over above it all, and not needing to connect with the people on the front lines because you already know best, right? And it also leads to self-absorption. And what's that? That's narcissism. Folks who are narcissistic, who have low honesty, humility, engage in things like these Machiavellian political shenanigans, and they tell lies to people, and they rationalize it to themselves because it works for them and they feel superior. So in a way, the fact that organizations have these hierarchies means that they're kind of naturally headed to destruction unless there are a lot of checks and balances in place. Keep everyone humble. So your book has given you a model for large scale change. And they have 3 dimensions. So one of the dimensions is the time frame for change, short or long. We would prefer it to be long, right? That's what OD likes. And a very short period in which to change is stressful. So ideally, we're down here, but when many organizations leave things until the last minute, as we often do, then they'll be over here. Then there's the level of support for organizational culture. And when you're going to change, we know that we encounter resistance to change, that resistance is normal and predictable. And we know that resistance to change has to do with organizational culture. And if you want to change, that is pretty compatible with the organizational culture, then it'll be easier to do. People will find that more acceptable. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's a little different, but yeah, we can do that. But now imagine that you want to make a change that runs against the core values of the institution. It's going to be really hard for people. In hierarchical, bureaucratic organizations, when there's a big difference between the top and the bottom, you can see, all organizations will say they're into EDIA, but really they have elitist values, and you can see a lot of class privilege, and they'll use words like prestige because they imagine that's a good thing, and they'll have titles, and some people have big fancy offices and secretaries and reserved parking spaces, right? And all that. Now imagine you go somewhere like that and you say, okay, you need to have a flat structure and be collaborative and respect people on the bottom. How well are they going to take that? Are these somebodies going to be listening to those nobodies? Like how long would it take to get somebody to unlearn that if that's what they've been trained into for the last 20 years? Are you going to do that in a day? No, are they going to accept that idea? Or are they going to say, hey, wait a minute. No, I earned my way up here and I have the right education. See the problem. Then another issue is they call the degree of discontinuity with the environment. And that's like, how much change do you need? So you might need a little change because you're not that out of sync of the environment, or you might need a really big change. And of course, that's going to be harder. So say OD likes the long time frame and we like the collaborative mode. Well, OD would like this quadrant, participative evolution, that you have enough time to do it, and the groups are feeling positive about the change. Right? It's incremental, there's anticipation of the change, and there's support from culture and ready to collaborate. And then we can see there's shades of gray with 2 and 3. And then the one that's the least OD would be the dictatorial transformation. There's a crisis, and we're just gonna have to sweep all this aside and do things differently, and there's not gonna be a consultation and a discussion. Well, now let me look at 2 and 3, charismatic transformation and forced evolution. So charismatic transformation means that you have the support of the culture, so you have less resistance, but it happens in a really short time, so people are going to scramble, okay? But, we're in this together and we're ready to do this, and it could be hard, but we'll pull it together. That's like healthy organization needs to adapt to COVID. We scramble, but we do it. Then a little more different would be when a little more difficult possibly is when there's no support or little support from the culture. People really don't like this. And then you're kind of really going against the grain. And so you need to make incremental adjustments that are about changing norms and values. But that takes a long time, and sometimes you don't have enough time. So OT, when it works, is usually used by an externally recruited manager. It's a new manager, and they're like, okay, we've just gotta change everything. Somebody who's internally recruited is going to be boiled in the culture and the ways of doing things and more trapped. So if a board of governors see that an organization is going to crash and burn, they might want to replace the president. OT can work, but sometimes it doesn't, right? Of course, the outcomes are usually always uncertain. But this is a big, risky thing where you hope for the best, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Culture, an organization's culture needs to be adapted to its environment, and an organization's strategies need to work with its culture. What's the strategy? It's your course of action. It's like a path that you use to achieve your objectives. Okay. And you remember what culture is. Culture is about values, and values is kind of about like how you do things. And so your path of action obviously has to work with the way people are used to writing and rolling. Now, the textbook gives this list of core characteristics of culture, and this is kind of like their ideal culture according to OD. People have autonomy, we care about customers, we care about the employees, managers are supportive, the employees can be creative, there's great communication channels, you're not all siloed such that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and we like to explore and take risks. And well, this sounds like somewhere I would want to work, but I wonder, is this always the culture that's best adapted to the environment? Is it? I mean, this doesn't sound like the culture in the military to me. But is the military effective? This sounds like it would be a psychologically healthy workplace. I can say that. If an organization's undergoing transformation, and transformation is what's going to save the organization, things aren't going to look like that. Vision. It's about where you're going. Management needs to know what the vision is. It needs to be a good vision. You have to have the skill to communicate that to followers and get them to go along with you. And the direction of the organization, which is towards the vision, should align with the employee's sense of career calling. So where your organization's headed should be a direction that you want to go into, right? That works for you and your career, because you get to do things that use your talents. You get to make an impact that aligns with your values. And when you're doing that, we would hope that it's in a trusting relationship. We'd expect that it's in a trusting relationship with management, and that you'd be rewarded for your good performance and not rewarded for poor performance. For that to work, your personal values need to be aligned with the values of the organization. If you and the organization have antithetical values, you're in a hierarchical, elitist organization, and you are into equality, that's gonna be hard for you. And you might find that a lot of the EDI they're doing is really performative and about making the people on top look good while not really doing anything to dismantle the system. So please, as you go forward after you graduate, I hope that you, as a consequence of taking this course and having learned this and done that career development assignment, I hope the one thing that I could give you is a better knowledge or awareness of your values so that you can make those choices about where you want to work. Now, organizational cultures can be strong or weak. So in a strong culture, the values of the organization are intensely held. People believe in, what it is, collaboration or equality, whatever those are, and they're widely shared. You have high buy-in for the values. So that might not be the case in a company that's more decentralized or siloed. You get different values in different silos. Now, how well do you think those silos are going to work together? I'm going to add that a strong culture is not necessarily a good culture. I feel the textbook kind of sets you up to think that, like strong culture. Well, what if the organization has a toxic culture? Say a really elitist, class privileged way of looking at the world and doing things. And it's dysfunctional, but it's strong. That doesn't make it good. And let's say you have a weak culture. You have different departments that have kind of different values. Let's say engineering has different values than marketing, that has different values than research, yet somehow you're able to come together as a team. Is that a bad thing? If it works, it's a good thing. So be aware that you can have strong cultures, you can have weak cultures, you can have moderate cultures. And at the end of the day, what matters is, does this work? On this table that you see here, there are 4 cells with 2 dimensions. And one of them is kind of, let's say, they say number, but it really means proportion. So percent of members sharing the values. Was it really low? Or is everyone on board with this? And then the other dimension is commitment to values. So you can share a value and be like, you know, this is a good value. Or you can be like, this is the meaning of my life. And so you have an intense culture situation where people have strong commitment to values, but you know, not many members have that. There'd be some conflict. You get a strong culture where, you know, everyone has those values and they're all really committed. According to the strategy culture matrix, there are 4 basic alternatives in determining your change strategy. And I think that's the wrong, can you see how I have the wrong box there? So this is the box I want to be, the figure, I'm sorry, that I want you to look at. So there is managing around the culture, managing the change, changing the strategy, and reinforcing the culture. And let's talk first about managing the change. Try not to look at that wrong figure, thinking about this figure. So you can manage the change when change is important and there's buy-in and it's compatible with the culture. So then you can use the culture to create the change. You can leverage it, let's say, to use it somehow to lead people, to reward people. Then, what if you have, say the change is compatible with the culture and the need for change is low? Well, then that's not so hard either, right? There's emphasize shared values and you take your little step in the right direction. Get into more trouble when the change is less compatible with the culture. And it's going to be hardest when the need for that change is bigger, and easier when it's lower. So managing around the culture, what could you do? It's still important, but it's incompatible with the present culture. Who leads culture? Leaders. So you might have to reshuffle the power, get a different leader, leverage that, apply rewards and punishments. And then what's going to happen if you have an important change, right? You need to make this change and it's incompatible with the culture. Okay, that could be really hard. And that's your most difficult situation. I am very, very tired. I feel like this is confusing a little bit. And I'm even wondering if there might be something wrong with that figure. So if you have any questions about this, let me know. I didn't get much sleep. According to your one theory, I know you've heard that organizations are composed of 5 subsystems. Well, you can have different theories that about the number of systems or subsystems in an organization. And according to this one, there is a technical system that solves production problems, kind of like technical subsystems, according to socio-technical systems view. And then there's a political one, and that's about, politics is about how you allocate resources and power. And power is kind of the ability to do stuff, and resources are what you do with this, what you use to do the stuff. And then culture comes down to values and beliefs. And it's important to understand all of these when you're making a large change, because you have to think about how the change is going to work internally. But then you also have to be aware that the organization's in an external environment. You can have external forces on an organization. And OD practitioners tend to be quite focused on the internal stuff. But sometimes, let's say there's another organization that has some kind of jurisdiction over your organization, or that it answers to, and you need to be aware of that. Steps to strategic change start with that idea of a vision. You need to know where you're going. Okay, what's your image of the desired organization? And who gets to participate in coming up with that image? If you need to change drastically in a short time, you're not going to have the room or the time to do a lot of consultation. And so that's maybe what the board of governors wants, or what the new leaders want. Need to understand these different systems and subsystems in the organization, intervene in all of them, and understand that they're going to interact with each other. Need for a large scale, industrial scale cultural changes come up because a company can have strong values that are no longer adaptive in the environment, because the company or the organization acts in the environment of larger society. And they're all these different times have a different zeitgeist. So now, say we have some feminist values. It's okay for me to be teaching this as a woman, but 1900, I don't know about that. So a company is going to have to change to get its values in line with those of wider society, because your customers are going to come from wider society. So will your new employees. Some companies are in very dynamic environments, and they really need to be in tune with the environment. Sometimes companies are faring poorly. Sometimes they're changing because they're growing really rapidly. And things happen like mergers and acquisitions, and then they have to think about how are we going to be part of this other company? Cultural change it's not easy, right? Think about, if you've ever had to unlearn beliefs in your life. Like, was there something that your parents taught you that you believed when you were 15 that you realized weren't your values by the time you're 30? It doesn't happen overnight. And so it's tricky and it's difficult. And, maybe it's not the first thing that you try. You do encounter resistance. OD is not something that can really save a failing organization, because it requires a lot of resources, and it's really designed for incremental change. Organizations, like people, have a lifespan. It's actually okay for a company to fail, or you should expect it. Don't believe that a company has to live forever, because that's not really what happens. Like, you will probably live longer than the average organization around you. And think of the big name companies now that everyone knows. Google. How long has that been around for? Did your grandfather remember that? How many companies that were famous for your grandfather are still around now? It's not many. For companies in the United States, the lifespan's about 15 to 20 years. And if you look at this graph, you can see that some of it's projected. So projections can be tricky because they involve guessing the future, but let's look up to about 2021. And you can see that there's been ups and downs since where they have 1965, but the general trend, like if you put a regression line through that, is that it's getting shorter. The lifespan's getting shorter. So maybe, you know, the company exists for a while and it goes for as long as it reasonably can. And, you know, maybe that's not 200 years. Maybe that's more like 10 years or 20 years. And then, you know, maybe the company breaks up or people start again. I know from having done notification consulting that when somebody's laid off, it can be a shock and it looks like they've been hit by a ton of bricks, especially if it's the first time it's ever happened to them. But I've also seen folks that have been through a few layoffs who could be like, yeah, you know, I've done this before. And even when folks are really devastated by it, and let's say you work with them in an outplacement company, well, they tend to perk up pretty quickly and they start thinking about the different things they'll do. And hey, you know, I like this, maybe I can do more of that. And so I know that it's hard and difficult, but it's losing a job is actually not the end of the world. And a company going under is not the end of the world. But it is good that we know that this can happen, and it's better if we can be prepared for it, because then there's less of a difficult impact on people. So OD, which has all these values of caring and sharing and collaboration, works best for healthy organizations that want to achieve even higher standards of excellence, or relatively healthy organizations that want to be healthier, but it's not designed or developed for politically unhealthy organizations, and like that kind of system one management. And that is kind of often the problem that you're going to get called into, because people can take managers a really, really long time to realize that something is wrong. And you might wonder, how could they not see the writing on the wall? And they didn't. And by the time you're brought in, it might be too late. Something that the textbook didn't talk about, it was kind of mentioned in passing once, that, oh, if you're going to do certain collaborative strategies, there's a union, you want to be talking to the union, is union management relationships. And these are really important. If you're an internal OD practitioner, you're probably working for HR. And if you are an external practitioner, then you're going to be probably hired by HR or hired by management. And something that's important to remember, especially as you're going out into your careers in the world of work, is that HR represents management interests. Okay, HR works for management. If you are in an organization that is managerially, politically corrupt and dysfunctional, well, then there's going to be a lot of pressure on folks in HR to do things that people with CPHR certificates should not be doing. And so when you see that happening and you think, how could this be happening? How could they do that? Remember to always look up to where the power is, okay? People reflect the systems that they are in. HR isn't the only organization, isn't the only arm of an organization that works for management, the way everyone does. So does legal services. So if something happens to you in an organization, let's say you're bullied by a manager, say a manager perpetrates something, and there's sometimes there's a policy, and the policy says this sort of thing definitely doesn't happen around here, and if it does, there's a process. And who runs that process? HR? Who does HR work for? If you're being abused by somebody in management, often it's because they're reflecting an abusive system. Like maybe they're being treated like that by their own bosses, or they've been reinforced for 20 years that the way you get things done is by bullying. And maybe you're the kind of person that doesn't like to go along to get along or wants to stand up for the right thing. And that can be very, very unpleasant. So let's say there's this policy and you believe that you can report something and it's going to be dealt with. That happens when there's some kind of external oversight. Oversight's really important. Checks and balances are really important. I like to see that an organization has an external kind of process for complaints and investigations, something like an ombudsman, where you can really, really believe that this is going to be impartial. If the person running a process is an internal practitioner, well, remember what we learned in, was it chapter 1, chapter 2? Internal practitioners are subject to internal politics. Security services. Let's say you're feeling unsafe in your workplaces, and security there to keep you safe. Security works for management too. And let's say that you are unfairly and cruelly dismissed. Well, if management asks security to escort you off the premises, they will do that, and very unceremoniously. And don't assume that by reporting an incident to security that it's going to be dealt with impartially, because the manager of security services is also answering to management. When things are wrong in an organization, remember this. You look up the hierarchy. And oftentimes the person that's driving that is keeping their hands very clean because they're above this all. It's not the alpha that's doing it, it's the betas, and they're just reporting this problem that is you. Okay. In a healthy organization, and remember that most organizations are at least a little unhealthy, but in a healthy organization, there is a relationship between management and employees that is positive and collaborative. So if HR handles employees and payroll and talent management and all these wonderful things, but doesn't really ultimately at the end of the day represents their interests, well, who represents the employees? The answer to that is called a union. And when the little guy doesn't have much power, one thing you can do is sort of come together as a group. And in fact, when managers are trying to keep people down, or when they're concerned about subordinates who are a threat, they will try to keep them apart. And so what unions do is they bring people together in solidarity. And then let's say have really powerful management, and you have a lot of employees. But when they come together, they have more power and starts to level that relationship. Okay. If you've been on campus and you've seen those posters, we could keep 3912, which is the Union for Part-Time Academics. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions or comments on that? I'm going to step off camera to look, grab a book here. Nope. Okay, so you've now read the textbook, and next week I'm super excited to be inviting Lucy Coatsum into class, and Lucy is going to be teaching us about EDIA, because this book, even though it talks about power, right? We talk about power a lot. It thinks about power as sort of hierarchies and levels. So the president has more power than the vice president, than the director, and so on. I'm glad we talked about power. I'm glad we learned about dominance and submission, but there are additional complexities. There are social groups that have more or less power. So probably know that in the workplace in general, white folks have more power and privilege than Black and Indigenous folks, that men have more power and privilege than women, that folks who are able-bodied have more power and privilege than people with disabilities, that folks who are cisgender and heterosexual have more power and privilege than those who are transgender or homosexual. So how do we do EDIA, and how do we do that well? And so I'm very excited for Lucy's presentation, and I know that one of them is about benchmarking, because if we're going to have real change, then we're going to need objective baseline measures. So we can use our survey research and feedback to see if things are really changing and to hear from people. There are 3 bonus points activities that I have posted on Brightspace and sent out in a class email. One of them is, 2 of them are tomorrow, and then one of them is in December. And for the 2 that are tomorrow, one is at 9 a.m. and that is a screening of the hunting ground. That is about students who report sexual violence. And it's about colleges in the United States, and it's a frank discussion about what they experience when they do that and how that might compare to the organizational myths and narratives about how these things are handled when they happen. That is a giant trigger warning. I've heard it's really difficult to watch. Then the other one is on a union report on administrative compensation. So let's say there's not much money to pay folks who are lower down on the organizational hierarchy. Well, something that this union group did was use FOIPOP. They searched public records to find out how much those on the top are paying themselves, and might be a little more than you were expecting. And then the other one in December is about, I think, performativity in bureaucracy and EDIA positions. So it's the same deal as before. Write a 500-word, 1-page reflection for up to 1% bonus on your final grade. We have some, before I move on, Lucy has selected some readings for you and some activities. So I have posted those under week 14 on Brightspace, and they've been there for a while. I wasn't sure if Lucy was going to add more. When I met her on Tuesday, I thought, let's try to keep it simple. According to the syllabus, there are 2 activities. I believe only one is posted. If for whatever reason we end up doing less, so let's say that you only do 4 activities and not 5, then I'll just adjust the weighting. And then another reminder is that you will have your next quiz on this content, chapters 14, 15, and 16 on Sunday at stroke of midnight. If you need an extension, you know the drill. And with that, I'll turn off the recording and make myself available for you.